Let's go.
Here's a quick video on how to set the gas pressures on your monotube shocks. First, we need to fully extend the shocks. We can do this either by removing the shocks from the car or jacking the car up to let the shocks fully extend. If we don't do this, the shocks will read higher pressure than what is truly there. Make sure the schrader valve depressor on the gauge is fully threaded out. Then remove the cap from the schrader valve and screw the gauge onto the schrader valve. If the seal in the gauge is good, you will not need a wrench to seal it. You will simply need to thread it on by hand and use the gauge as a helper to tighten it up. Thread the schrader valve depressor fully in. This will allow the pressure of gas in the shock to fill the gauge. Every time you check the pressure in your shocks, it's going to read 7 pounds lower than what was actually in the shock due to the gas that was in the shock used to fill the gauge. Now use the air chuck from the nitrogen tank to fill the shock with gas using the schrader valve on the gauge. This is going to put more pressure in the shock than what you want. To bleed the excess pressure out, simply crack the gauge fitting loose from the shock and slowly bleed the pressure off. With the gauge sealed again, unscrew the schrader depressor valve and take the gauge off the shock. On ARS shocks, we recommend 15 pounds in the rear shocks and 20 pounds in the front shocks, unless you're using canister shocks, in which case we recommend 50 pounds. Adding pressure to the shocks makes a similar change as adding turns to your car. We found that adding 80 pounds of pressure to a shock is about equal to 1 turn on that corner of the car. It does not change the spring rate of the car. Other manufacturers of shocks do not use a base valve design like ARS, and you will need to run much more pressure in order to keep the oil from cavitating. This does add rod pressure and decreases performance. Do not use regular compressed air in your shocks, or the pressure will not remain constant and it will corrode the interior of the shock. Do not try to add pressure without using one of these specifically designed gauges. It will not work.